excited to be up here. It's been a while. Always look forward to delivering a message to you guys. I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, Cicero approached me because there is some doubt of how long we could be on island. We could be out of here in 6 or 7 weeks. We could be out of here in months. So that's still kind of foggy right now. I think you kind of figure that out when Nina spoke this morning, that, that creates a little bit of anxiety because you don't know, especially if you're in another country and there's the international move and all the things that come along with that. So we're kind of at that point, so Cicero thought, well, I better get you now than risk waiting later about this specific topic for this morning. So this morning, Cicero specifically asked me to talk about Nina and our marriage. What's made it work? What things don't work? So I've kind of titled today's lesson is God's Design for Marriage. God's Design for Marriage. So to kind of give you a little bit of a background, kind of where I came from. You heard this morning, Nina kind of gave you some of her background. Didn't really came from a broken home, a godless home. They didn't believe in God at all. Matter of fact, her father is a professed atheist. And I'm kind of on the other end of that. My parents have been married almost 50 years. Come to find out many years later that it was a shotgun wedding. That's a term we use when someone becomes pregnant prior to getting married, and that's what kind of spurred them getting married together. So there wasn't a lot of, I think, thought of some of the things I'm going to talk about this morning on. They were just, we need to get married, we're going to have a child. And after they got married, shortly thereafter, my mother had a miscarriage. And I think she was about 5 or 6 months into it. So my father grew up in a home that was, I'd say my grandparents were religious. Okay, they professed Christians. They were at church every Sunday. But I would argue that Christianity for my dad's parents was not the forefront of their existence, what they did. They didn't live it, that's for sure. And a matter of fact, it was my mother's father who was a huge influence on my father, and had spent a lot of time with him. He had a big orchard. He grew trees, and so my dad would go out and spend time with him, and my mother's father ministered to my father. Even though he'd grown up in the church, he didn't know much about the Bible and wasn't certainly a student of it, and became interested in becoming a minister. And it's kind of interesting how it all transpired. My dad has a bachelor's in business because that's what his father demanded that he go get when he went to college. And through that process, he got his business degree and then thought, I don't want anything to do with business. And his father wanted him to either be a school administrator or a lawyer, some job with status of some sort, right? He wanted to kind of set him up for success. My grandfather had grown up in a very, very poor family. And as a matter of fact, he had supported all his brothers and sisters and went to college, which was not uncommon during the late 20s, early 30s, 1930s. And so he really wanted to make sure his son was successful in a worldly sense. My mother's parents, on the other end, were very devoted people. My grandmother was a very selfless person. She was always behind the scenes serving other people. My grandfather was a very charismatic man, a preacher for almost 72 years in the pulpit. Matter of fact, his siblings, all 5 of his brothers, were also preachers. All 6 of his sisters' husbands were preachers. So together, you're talking about 12 preachers. Okay, so very different. However, looking at both of where my grandmother, or where my mother's family and my dad's family, they were both actually very dysfunctional families in their marriages. My dad was an only child, and his parents, his dad was very overbearing, a very dominant figure. As a matter of fact, I remember meeting some people that used to work with him. He was a superintendent of a school system. In other words, he's in charge of a school system. And I remember a woman who was a secretary for the school system said, your grandfather struck fear into people. You know, he was just a very powerful, he had a presence when he walked in a room, and people were just, you know, were always at odds with him. My grandmother was a sweet woman, but she was very condescending in the sense that you know, she would undermine him in certain ways, and so that created a real problem in their family. And not to say my dad was also abused by his father, who was very physical when he'd get angry. My mother, on the other hand, her family was kind of opposite in the sense. Her dad was a very strong figure. Her mother was very didn't say I love you, or wasn't very affectionate, and quite the opposite. Even with her husband, never told him once in the, I think they were married 76, 77 years. Never once told him she loved him. And I didn't know that until after she passed away and he told me that. Which I'm thinking, how could you be married to someone for that long? And as a matter of fact, on her deathbed, she professed to my mother, I never should have married him. That's dysfunctionality. So you can imagine what kind of went on in the background for both of my parents, okay, growing up. My mom had two siblings, but they were like 18 years older than her. So there was she was an accident, if you didn't figure that out, and my grandmother blamed my grandfather for that. And so, like two don't tango, but that's what happened. And so you can see my parents get married, and then they have me as the firstborn. And my mother, I think, was maybe 21 at the time, very immature emotionally, and also suffered from being bipolar. If you don't know what that means, has very high highs and very low lows, and so she was the kind of person that would draw me into her at times and be a wonderful, nurturing mother, and then other times would crush me and would push me away. And so it created a lot of fear in relationships with females, because she was polarizing. She was polarizing in all her relationships, even with my father. My father eventually went on and got his Bible degree, got a master's in Old Testament theology and a PhD, and spent, I would say, probably a majority of his time going and ministering to everybody else but his family. And so you can see today, my sister, she'll go to church, but church doesn't mean much to her. And so we've kind of ended up very, very different from each other in that sense. So that's kind of my background in that sense. I had a lot of resentment for many years because I see my father, spending all these times, ministering to other people, and yet I didn't have that type of relationship with him. And so that really affected my relationships in general. I had, like Nina, she had a fear of men, can't depend on a man. Matter of fact, her dad told her, he said, the only thing you need to be concerned with is yourself. That's how this world works. You got to take care of number one. And I had a different fear of getting in a relationship, locked down with someone that was just going to be highs and lows, and where I'm always feeling like I'm walking on eggshells and it's explosive. And that creates a lot of anxiety in myself. But when I met Nina back in 2004, and I'm older, almost 12 years older than Nina, so there was never even a thought. I wasn't even looking for a relationship, and that's how it usually happens, right? When you're not looking. I wasn't looking for any type of relationship. We struck up a good friendship, and I think part of it, she comes from a different culture, okay, a very different culture than what we have in the U.S. came from very different life experiences, and that kind of drew me in. Very interesting, lots of conversations about the different types of culture. And we've been together for a better part of 13 years, almost 11 years of marriage, and we have never had an argument or a fight. And most people are shocked by that. As a matter of fact, we've been confronted at some of our other churches that whenever you are ready to tell us what's really going on in your marriage, just let us know. Because that doesn't seem possible. But I think because both of us grew up in such, drama-filled, households where something was always going on, we both made a very, very conscious effort to not replicate that. Okay, and so when Social would talk to me about how do I explain what has worked, I had to really think. There's 1,000 ways I could go with this, but I really needed to narrow it down to basically 3 biblical themes. Okay, so I'm going to make it very simple. I'm going to make it practical. I'm going to make it livable for you. So, theme number 1, godly priorities in marriage. Godly priorities in marriage. In a survey, men and women were asked to list their priorities, and more often than not, they went something like this. Men listed work as their number 1 priority. Number 2 was their hobbies. Number 3 was their children. And number 4 was their wives. Likewise, when women were asked during the same survey, women listed children as number 1. Work is number 2. Household chores is number 3. And last but not least was their husbands. Another survey found that most marriages spent less than 10 minutes a day talking to their spouse. That's on average. And I wouldn't say that that's necessarily culturally exclusive. I think that's in a lot of the really busy, the more busy we are, filling our lives with going here and there and activities, that's probably pretty close to true. Let me ask you a question. What if you only spent 10 minutes a day on your personal hygiene and grooming? Think about that. We spend more time doing that. Or how about our devices that we carry around with us? People spend more time on those devices than they are an actual conversation with their significant other. Same study found that 40% of important conversations were conducted while in the car. Think about that. Driving a car is a high-risk activity in a sense, right? Depending on where you're at. And you're trying to conduct a important conversation in a car. Now, I've read a bunch of books on interpersonal communication, men and women, and one of the things it says is if you really want to get a guy to talk, take him on a long road trip because he doesn't have to sit there and look at you. He can look at the road and you'll get him to really probably talk more so than going down to a restaurant facing each other trying to talk. So maybe that's why women have picked up on that, and that's where a lot of the conversations are happening. But you know what? That's not what God intended. That wasn't God's design for marriage. Not at all. That's not how it was meant to be. If you will, let's look at Romans chapter 11, verse 36. Reads, everything is from him, by him, and for him. Glory belongs to him forever. Who are we talking about here? God. God needs to be number one on that list. That was the design. Not our hobbies, not our work, not our children, God. In Colossians 1:16 reads, "For him all things were created, things in the heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him." So God needs to be number one. And I think all of us here can collectively agree to that. Now, whether or not we put it in practice, that's another discussion. Number two on that priority list needs to be your spouse. Not your children, not your work, whatever else needs to be your spouse. That is how it is designed. That's how God designed it. How do we know that? Turn to Genesis 2, all the way back at the beginning. Genesis 2, chapter 2, verse 22 through 24. "Then the Lord God made woman from the rib that he had taken out of man, and he brought it to her. He had brought her to the man. The man said, 'This is now my bone of my bones and the flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man.' That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united with his one, and they become one flesh." One. I remember from time to time my kids will ask me this loaded question, or at least they think it's loaded. "Daddy, if you had to choose one of us, who would you choose?" I'm sure from time to time some of you have gotten that question. And I tell them 100 times out of 100, I choose your mother.
Wow.
Period. And at first, the first time I told them that, it's like, it's, I can't believe that, They need to know from the beginning that that's how God designed it. God is number one in this household, and your mother is number two. That is my priority. They asked me the same thing and got the same answer. How do we demonstrate this? Because you're going to wonder, well, okay, you say that, but how does that demonstrate? Something as simple as this. There are times that maybe I got to be heading out the door, and so my wife will make me breakfast, and I get served first before anybody else does. Now you may think, well, why does that matter? Think about it. She's putting me in front of the rest of them. That's a simple demonstration of where I am, right? Same thing when we have a conversation with each other, because we have young kids and they like lots of attention, want to be showered with compliments and stuff, and there's a time and a place for that. But when I'm having a conversation with my wife, I don't put the conversation on pause and answer their questions and stroke their egos. Not going to happen. I tell them they're dismissed, and when I tell them they can come back and be a part of the conversation, then that's the appropriate time to do that, but not while I'm having a conversation with my wife. Because why? My wife is in front of my children, not the other way around. That's how you demonstrate that, by putting the other in front. Priorities. Number 3 on that list should be your children. Not your work, not your hobbies. I see this a lot with people I work with. They typically have the same kind of list. They're overachievers at work, right? They spend massive amounts of time at work, which I would argue in many cases is poor time management. I see how ineffectively they're working. And more importantly, that it's not like the work's not going to be there tomorrow. If there's a timeline, 9 times out of 10, it's because they put it on themselves, not because work necessarily put it on them. And so they're spending all this time at work, so that's showing number one, right? Number two is they're quick to go play golf, go do things that kind of they're interested in, and the wife and the kids are getting the leftovers, to piggyback off of what Brian was saying this morning, even when we talk about giving, right? We often say give the first fruits, right? That's what the Bible commands us to do. Give the first, our best, not leftovers. But what happens when we start giving leftovers in our relationships? We start having behavioral problems with our children. We start having communication problems with our spouses because we're not putting things in their appropriate order, how God designed it. If you would, turn to 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. That's 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, especially their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. In other words, if you're going out and taking care of everybody else, but you're not taking care of the things at home, you're considered worse than an unbeliever. You know why? Because you know better. That's the difference. There's no plausible deniability here. You have willfully put others in front of your family. And when the word provide is used here, I would argue that the word provide is not simply I'm providing a house and I'm providing subsistence. That's not what it's talking about. It's meaning a lot more than that. It's meaning to provide physically, obviously, to meet those needs, emotionally, right? You got to be available to do that, right? Spiritually. How we grooming our children to walk in the Lord's ways. That takes some activism. So it's not something that's just going to happen. And sadly, I've seen this, and it was the case when I grew up, that I think my dad thought through proximity, distance, because I was near. And I did. I picked up a lot of things, obviously. That somehow that would grow my faith. Right? And certainly he demonstrated a lot of things that obviously are why I'm here today. I won't take any of that away. Certainly he played a huge influence in my life. At the same time, I think he took it for granted that somehow being nearby, that I was just going to, through osmosis, I was going to somehow absorb the knowledge. Right? And it doesn't happen that way. So we really need to be involved in our children's lives. And be available. So, in practicality, how do you do that? I would argue things like, when you eating together at the family table, right? I have to tell the kids all the time they want to bring 1,000 items to the table, whatever they're playing with, whatever. No, because I know what those little toys become iPads and phones and other things as they're going to get older. And no way. It has no place. I do not bring that stuff to the table. My wife doesn't bring that stuff to the table most of the time. And those are things but that's something you have to consciously make. It is about the family. That is a time that we sit together, we break bread, and we talk. Right? That's what it's for. When we look at other practicalities, we look for things like, how we schedule time together. Deliberate, not again what's left over. I'm full-time in graduate school, okay? And that takes a lot of time, especially when it's an engineering-related, lots of work to do. So what do I have to do in order to carve out that time? Well, when I come home, I deliberately put time aside, not just for us to sit at the dinner table and spend time, but also with my children, right? So I spend that hour, hour and a half where we can play and we do things together. And we don't schedule other things to go do where I'm not going to have that interaction with them. So I can hear how their day was, what transpired, what's on their heart. Okay, that's deliberate. The same with my wife. You know, I'm going to take that time to sit with her, and you know, usually when I come home, the first thing I do is I do this and I do this. I listen. You know, I'm listening for those things of, I'm stressed out today, you know, this is what's happening, and then I'm just a sounding board to just listen and to shake my hand and go, I'm right there. Is there something I can do? Not to fix her problems, that's not what I'm here for, which I think a lot of us have a problem with. We feel, especially as men, we feel like we need to immediately, well, why did you do that? Or why didn't you do this? Well, that is not fixing the problem. That is creating more stress. They simply want to just express what they're feeling. When we say we limit our extracurricular activities, you know, like with my kids, they all play piano. So we try to schedule those at one time. That's a practical application. Why? Because if I spread it throughout the week, then we're you know, moving, you get the travel time to and from, you know, it becomes kind of chaotic, especially even with their sports. You know, they're in CrossFit, so they all go together. You know, we kind of, as much as we can, we try to keep it as a family unit. So we're still meeting all those pillars of life, your physical, spiritual, emotional, but we do it as a collective unit, right? Because time is precious, and our children are only with us for a short period of time, and then they're going to go off. And hopefully, if you've done well, they're going to have successful marriages and families themselves. That's what the ultimate goal is. I'm hoping to equip them by demonstrating and teaching them the ways that God wants it. God, number one, my spouse, number two, and my children, number three. Okay? So, my second theme is godly love in marriage. I hear this a lot from people too who've been married a long time. It's just like they kind of go through the motions, and I just don't feel that feeling that I did when we were married. I don't feel that burning desire and all those kind of things. And now it's more like a roommate type situation, not a spouse. Certainly the love has seemed to kind of dissipated some. So I want you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're going to read verses 4 through 8. Many of you will know this. It says, love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails. Paul, in this particular passage, is saying love is not an emotion. Love is an action. I think we get caught up in what the world tells us that love is, right? That I got the hots for you. You know, that chemical reaction, right? We got that feeling inside, oh, I love her. Well, no, that's not love. That's called lust. There's a difference. I certainly have a passion for my wife, you know, that we want to continue to foster, but this is really about action. So let's look at it and let's put it in the context of how it relates to our marriage, okay, specifically. So the first one says, love is patient. Another word for patient is long-suffering. So when you go back into the Greek, that's actually what it is referring to, long-suffering. It is not short-term. Patience isn't something that's short-term, right? It does not mean that you tell your spouse, all right, I'll give you one more chance. I've heard that many times too. Okay, this is it. One more chance that you get your act right. Okay, that is not love. Love is kind. You know, the word kind means withholding what harms as well as give what heals. So I'm going to hold you back from the harm and try to give you what heals. That is what kind is. That sometimes means that we have to be tough, right? How am I being kind if I'm not being tough at times, right? That's called enabling. Are we familiar with that? That's where we know we should allow the other person to try to deal with these things, and we may think we're being kind to them by shielding them, but really what we've done is we made a bad situation a worse situation. I'm going to give you an example of this. So when Nina and I first got married, she still had her college car, which was a 1993 Chrysler, I don't know, I can't remember what it was. It was a horrible car. And it didn't make it better that she did not, take care of it the way she should have. Leave the windows down when storms would come through. I mean, it was a hot mess. And I remember one morning she called me and she said, "Hey, my car is steaming or something. I pulled over, blah, 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 and I don't know what to do." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, call a tow truck and figure it out." Now, I can see the looks in your faces in here, and you're like, "What are you doing?" I'll tell you why I did that. Nina is masterful at finding every bit of detail about something she's interested in. Very resourceful, much more resourceful than even I am. I consider myself pretty resourceful. But she'll find out the things if she desires to know about it. But when she doesn't desire about it, then she's like, "I don't know. I don't know," and puts it on me. Now, I'm in the service. I could be deployed at any time. I'm gone for 6 months or I'm gone for a year. It's one thing if she's by herself and she runs into one of these problems and doesn't know how to deal with it, right? It's another if we have kids or small children. Okay? That's my thinking. Okay? She doesn't know that, right? I'm thinking long term. I don't want to enable her. I want to empower her. And so what did I do? She found called up the tow truck. Tow truck came, went in there, listened to what the guy did, started doing some research. I think what limited we had on our phones back then, and tried to figure out what he said. Got to her place of employment, and also I was in the middle of a big meeting, so I couldn't, I just couldn't jet off. I think I had to speak that morning is why the real reason. But when she came back, I remember she was a little perturbed with me, and I said, "I don't think you see what I did. I don't want you to have to think that you have to rely on me for everything. How much anxiety am I going to have if I'm downrange somewhere where I have very little contact with you, and something bad happens, and now you're in distress because now I'm going to be worried. I'm going to be worried about you, not focusing on where I'm at, the dangers that I'm having to encounter, wherever that may be. So it puts me at risk, puts her at risk. You see, those are the kind of things. That is actually kindness, because I'm actually looking out for long term by not enabling her. And that's how we need to look at things in our lives. Okay? The next one says, love is not envy. And I've seen this a lot too, with some of my worldly friends, where one spouse is envious of the other spouse because they got a promotion. Maybe both of them work. Both of them are very hardworking, but one keeps getting promoted and gets accolades while the other one doesn't. And there can be, at home, can be a little bit of a, that competitive spirit, but then it turns into envy, where it is not a constructive, but becomes very destructive and separates us. Love does not boast. When you boast, it really demonstrates an insecurity and spiritual immaturity, right? When we do that. And certainly when you're doing it to your spouse, boasting that maybe how you're better in certain things, or you're doing that's not helping the marriage. That doesn't edify at all. Love is not proud. So boasting and being proud are very similar in a sense. When you're proud, you're elevating yourself above your spouse. A few years ago, I saw a couple who was having a real problem because this one individual was, he felt that he was very, very self-righteous. And he would tell you that. I feel like I'm walking how God wants me to walk, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, you didn't have to tell me that. We can observe that. I don't need to hear from you. That tells me you're not really sure. You want me to kind of tell you that. His wife had come from a very abusive family, got married, had all kinds of problems. Horrible problems, drug addict, everything else. Got divorced and they got married. And so she's carrying all this baggage, extremely insecure in her walk with God, And so he would kind of elevate himself above her all the time. And it really caused a lot of problems. Instead of, getting down and being humble and trying to meet her where she was at, he was like, well, I'll just be this shining example. Well, she felt like it was unattainable. So it created this catechism between them. Do not help. Love does not dishonor. Like some of us like to tell it like it is. We're blunt. We like to, God made me this way. I'm just telling you, brother. I see this problem with you. Or I see, honey, I'm just telling you, Not taking in consideration how that message is being internalized by the other person. You know what I'm saying? It's not the message, it's how you deliver that message that is going to either help your spouse or is going to be detrimental. So that's a part of what love is. Love's not going to sit there and push the buttons and be like, well, look at me. Look at where you're falling short, and I'm just telling you like it is. Let me put it in a better context for you. If the CEO of your company or whoever that high person or general, whoever else came down, and you just told it like it is, would that be okay? In most instances, probably not. There's a place, a way, and some of us pride ourselves that we like to not to flower things up, and we want to be as honest as possible. But there can be problems in doing that, right? So you might tell it like it is to an extent, but you would say it in a different kind of way, wouldn't you? But see, once we think we got our spouse with us, it's like, well, you're a captive audience. I don't have to, work on my message with you. I can just tell you like it is. Well, no. Why would you? You're not going to talk to the boss, who, by the way, is like fourth on the list from my count. Work, maybe fifth or sixth, depending on somebody. Maybe way down here, then why would you tell the number 2 on your list, tell it like this? Again, this goes back to the priorities, right? That also means that in a marriage, we're not looking out for looking out for number 1 by being demanding, by being stubborn or dominating, and I've seen that in marriages too, where it's just like, well, I'm entrenched in this way of thinking and I'm unmovable. This is just how I was raised. Okay, then change. That tells me you haven't repented in your heart. You can change. You just choose not to. Love is not easily angered. Your spouse shouldn't feel like they're walking on eggshells when they're around you. That's probably not a good thing, right? I'm not saying there are not going to be times in your marriage where a message is delivered to you from your spouse. It may trigger something inside you. Maybe it's something that you are sensitive about. Maybe it's your weight, or it's the way maybe you're not really good at balancing a checkbook, or whatever that little subject is that's a trigger point for you, says something, and then that gets you stirred up inside, right? What I will say to you, the best thing you can do, and it's easier said than done, is that you need to step back. You need to measure what you're going to say and say exactly what you mean, right? In other words, Don't fire back with some type of emotional hand grenade because you're upset about what they're saying. Because if it's true, it's still true. But that doesn't mean that you need to fire back and again create a vortex of conflict because that's just a subject that you're not comfortable discussing. And sometimes that means removing yourself and say, okay, I'm getting your message. Can you give me a couple minutes? And the other party needs to look at that and go, okay, maybe I said something I shouldn't have said. And there have been times, because I'm a type A+++ type of personality, right? I'm a very strong personality. And so if I'm under a lot of stress, I can be very direct. Tell it like it is, which is not good. And I'll say stuff, and then I see the reaction, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. That's not what I meant. You know, forgive me. It's not right. There's no excuse for it. Don't excuse it. Well, it's been a tough day at work. But now you're minimizing it. Say what you mean. And that's if you're going to provide feedback to the person. Say, you know, it really hurts when you say that. You know, I'm struggling with this, and you know that. I'm going to work at it. Love does not delight in evil. I've seen this too, where the spouse is maybe struggling with inadequacies. You know, a spouse may be struggling with mistakes or with sin, and the other party kind of does this. Oh, well, kind of falling short of what God wants you to do, and you're like, I've seen this. That's horrible. You know, how's that gonna bring your marriage together? And I would argue that there was a lot of other things going on when those kind of things were happening, right? That goes back to that self-elevating above your spouse, being proud and boastful. Love trusts. Love protects. Meaning love does not point out the flaw in our spouse. Men, I've seen this where men, you know, will make his wife the, you know, brunt of the joke. With his pals, oh, they kind of laugh, they say something, and it hurts the spouse. I mean, you know, to be publicly ridiculed in some kind of way, right? Like that's funny, you know. Or I've seen this also where a wife will correct a husband in front of other people when you're thinking, what that correction that you made, does that even matter? I mean, what are you trying to prove there? Is that something you could have said, hey, by the way, that wasn't exactly 100% true. You know, when you're in the car and you're having that 10 minutes of your 40% of your conversation of the day, no, don't do that. But there's a time and a place to pull those things out. But that hurts the man because the man wants to be respected, and that seems to be very disrespectful in that sense. So again, you know, love, you know, protects. You know, we're not going to look to make snide remarks about each other and try to undermine each other. How's that helping your marriage? Love trusts. And this is a really, really important one, meaning that you give your spouse the benefit of the doubt. Okay, I don't care if everything's lined up, that, you know, the guilty plea's coming down, that you are going to trust your spouse that they were siding on the right side, right? And that you're not going to, you know, turn your back against them when times get tough. You need to be there. And I'm saying enable them, but I'm saying you need to be there and trust them. Okay. Love always hopes, meaning not giving up on your spouse. And then finally, love preserves. Never stop loving your spouse. Okay. So that was the second theme, love. So priorities are number one, lining things up in the correct order, how God designed it to be. Love, which is what Jesus exemplified, and we do it in our marriage specifically. You know, we're all going to fall short in our marriage from time to time. However, Peter notes in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8, Above all, keep your love for one another fervent, because love covers a multitude of sins. So anytime that I might provide constructive criticism specifically to my wife, because she knows I'm coming to her in love and I have her best interest at heart, she takes that message much differently than if I'm coming simply to, once again, elevate myself, to point out a flaw, like, oh, you're falling short, because I'm not doing it within love. So when you do it in love, even when you fall short, it's going to cover those sins, right? Yeah, my wife goes, I know you're struggling today, but I still love you. Isn't that important? Yeah. The third thing that I think has really been key also to our marriage is that maintaining a servant spirit in our marriage. Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 13 reads, "Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never lack in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality." So let's put that in the context of our marriage. I will argue this. If both parties in the marriage are trying to outserve each other, everything will be taken care of. I've seen that in churches were extremely serving, taking care of the flock, looking out for one another. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of need that goes unnoticed, right? Before Nina and I got married, we talked at length about what we thought was a man and a woman's role in a marriage, okay? It's a very important thing, right? Because she comes from a different culture. You heard this morning, her views of what men's role in the house may be quite skewed in a sense, right? Mm-hmm. Same maybe for me, what I think my mother was like a cleanaholic. I mean, she had a little bit of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, I think, is some, So if I took that and I'm like, well, that's how I grew up. My mom did everything. I don't think my dad's ever I don't even know if he knows where the washing machine's at, let alone know how to turn it on or do anything. So she did everything for him, when we discussed that, I realized, it's really important that we kind of define some things here before we get married. The division of labor. What's our working, who's going to work? Are we both going to work? Or are we going to stay home? How are we going to divide all those kind of things? And I literally wrote a list. And you kind of laugh, that's ridiculous. Why? Because how many of us go through life with expectations that have never been discussed? If I have this mental model over here how I think a woman should do things, and I've never expressed it to my wife, we might be at odds. Now, occasionally the planets line up together and those things kind of collude and it works, but only by chance. So let's take that out. Let's make it a certain thing by discussing those kind of things. And you're thinking to yourself, but I've been married for 20 years. How does this apply to me? I would argue that at every major juncture in your life, you need to go back, you need to sit at the table, and you need to discuss specifically what your expectations are. If you got kids that are leaving the house, do you think that's going to change things? What if your division of labor is, my oldest takes care of the laundry, this one does this one, and then all of a sudden you got an empty house. Well, who's doing that stuff? Is there just an expectation that, she's going to take it or he'll take it? And what happens is we don't talk about those kind of things. And when we don't talk about it, what happens is that we start building up resentment, right? Because we're like, the garbage is in there again, and he should be the one doing that. But we never said anything. We never communicated that. And he's probably thinking, either he's like oblivious, because there's some of us in here that would be oblivious to that. You walk by, there could be a mountain of laundry, and walk by and never see it, right? So it's really, really important to sit down and to define those things. So at every major juncture in our marriage, when we had our oldest, before she was born, we sat down and discussed at length, how are we going to do this? Did she want me to get up in the middle of the night and get the little one and bring it to her? Was that an expectation? You know what I'm saying? Or is it something she said, no, I'm going to take this, I'll go feed the little one, because she was breastfeeding. You know, there was no bottle involved. But if there was a bottle involved, would that change it? Yeah, there'd probably be an expectation, maybe change, especially if we were both working. But in this case, she was staying at home, so we discussed that. You'll take care of these things, and I'll take care of these things, right? And you're probably asking yourself, well, what does that have to do with serving? Because I look for every opportunity I can to take those burdens off of her. We may have discussed that this is my expectation of you, but when I come home and I can see it right away, there's stuff all over the place, Legos everywhere, whatever. And the kids, my kids are they're kids. They go in a room and it looks like an explosion happened, and then they're outside running around. And you're like, what happened here? But that's not what I do. I come in and I look and I go, okay, I turn on the washing machine. I throw in a load of wash. I check the dryer, see if there's something I can fold and put away and take care of it. Now the expectation, that's her job. That's what she's supposed to do. But how does that help me? How does that help me? Because late at night, she could be sitting there doing that stuff while I'm sitting up in the bed kind of, watching TV or doing something. No. What happens? She's done. I'm done with stuff. What happens? We connect. Do you see how that works? Because I've taken some of that load, that allows us to spend more quality time together. Okay? Now, I'm going to give you a caution on this one. Okay? Here's the caution. If you have a spouse that has a very specific way of doing a task, and you decide you have the greatest intentions to go in and do great things, and you decide, I'm going to do a load of wash, and I haven't done wash since I was in high school or whatever else, and you go, wow, there's a lot of stuff here, you just kind of shove it in there, you're not sure what temperature, and you pour the detergent, next thing you know you have all pink clothes, all your white shirts are now pink shirts. That's probably not a good thing. However, that should not stop you from asking, hey babe, can you write some of us may need a list. Can you write up step by step and put it up on the wall here that I can help you, so if I see something I can come in and do it, right? Because many of you use that as an excuse. Well, I just don't know how. My mom didn't tell me. Recently, on base at Kadena, one of the first sergeants, who's kind of his health and welfare is his job to kind of go around, make sure things are taken care of, and sometimes discipline. He has to be a part of that. But one of my buddies went out to the dorms where these young airmen are just coming in the Air Force, first time away from home, and you get to experience some pretty funny things. So he goes into a room, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. He had a pile of shirts and underwear almost to the ceiling. You know why? So what tipped him off was he just was smelling a little ripe, like he hadn't been washing, but he hadn't been washing his uniform because he couldn't afford to replace the uniform, but he could change the rest of his stuff. He didn't know how to wash clothes. He didn't ask anyone either. So he had literally, his paycheck was spent going t-shirts and underwear and socks, and he had a huge pile. Hundreds. He'd been going for months. Now, I would suggest that there were some other things probably going on there, but clearly wasn't equipped to do that, right? So you sometimes have to break it down by step, this is what I want. If a desire, and you need to ask those kind of questions on both sides. If I had a very, for instance, if I had a nice car and I have a particular way I like it washed and buffed and whatever else, because I know there's some guys out there that, and my wife was out there with a buffer, doing her best, and there's swirl marks all over my car because she didn't know how, but she meant well. She was trying to help out. That probably wouldn't be a good thing, okay? So again, go out. Don't let that stop you from serving. The point is, and for some of us, we don't see what the needs are. We just kind of come in and, yeah, whatever. Well, then that means that you need to sit down and write a list and go, check for blah, blah. Oh, yeah, where's that dishwasher at? Where's that thing called the dishwasher? Oh, here it is. Oh, there's stuff sitting in the sink. Okay, I can wash it up and put it away. Got 2 hands. Those are the kind of things that we look to serve one another. Because when we do that, in the end, we all benefit. My kids benefit from it. I benefit, because there are times I come in, my wife's like, she looks at me and she goes, yeah, I can see in your face, it's probably been one of those days, and she'll be like, why don't you just go upstairs and take 30 minutes and relax and kind of depressurize a little bit. Maybe I go up for a 30-minute nap, right? And I'm recharged. I'm more engaging. I can give more to my kids and to my wife. We look for those opportunities to serve one another. And that is a tremendous thing that I think will help go a long ways in our marriages. Even in mine, my wife, sometimes I come home and I'm like dreading because I know I'm like, man, I need to get to the lawn or I need to do this, and I'll come home and it's all done. And I'm like, wow. I mean, it's like, one less thing that's on my list that she took care of. And if we look for that, and see, this goes back to the previous one about love. If we're always looking to take care and love the other person, we're going to look to serve him and take care of him, right? And not because we're looking for something in return. That's not the point. That happens naturally, right? But because we truly want to serve. Okay? So this morning, I hope that you kind of got a, when Nina and I, we've have this incredible, and thank you for the kind words this morning. We have this incredible relationship, and people are like, I can't believe, you guys haven't had any kind of, I've heard some people say, well, having a good fight is like the spice of life. Okay, yeah. Really? A good fight is what we need. Okay, well, there's some other things going on there. Actually, Nina and I took a personality profile test, a very, very good one, that asks 100 questions. And it's very detailed. What are you greatest? What are you least? What represents you? And it's called the DIS Performax test. And our personalities do not jive. They do not go together, believe it or not. So when you read our profiles, they look like 2 bulls in a china closet, right? So which is fine if you both are going the right direction together. But if you disagree, that could be a very problematic, and there could be a lot of issues there. Why am I telling you that? It wasn't because I've heard people argue to me, well, you found your soulmate, you found that perfect person, you're just that outlier that just so happened. No, that is not it. It's because I put my priorities in order. I'm telling you, the order, God desires order. If you haven't figured that out, He desires that order. Putting Him first. Putting your spouse there. Loving and serving are the keys to a successful marriage. So this morning, if you're struggling in one of these domains, one of these themes, I would encourage you to seek out some brothers and sisters and to talk about it. Are there some things? Are there some techniques? I'm not going to say everything's going to work the same for everybody, because the dynamics are going to be very different. But the bottom line is the design is the design, And when you say, well, that really doesn't fit me, well then, okay, then it seems like we need to really talk about repentance. This is really what we're talking about. We're talking about a heart matter here, because you're unwilling to change your ways. You're inflexible. And that's what marriage takes. Marriage is never a 50-50. You know, in many cases it's 80-20 at times. And that's how it's going to work. But if you follow these things, I'm telling you, things will be substantially better. And you're still going to have hardships. You're still going to struggle, but you're going to struggle together, united. Mm-hmm. Right. If you will, bow your heads. Say a prayer. Most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together this morning. Thank you for your love for us. You know, many of us struggle in many areas of our lives, and you know, last thing we want to do is to come home to a home that's full of you know, of conflict. We want it to be really a place that we can come and relax and feel loved and appreciated. And Lord, help us to look at ourselves honestly, find the areas that we can do better, especially in our love. You know, what are the things that we're falling short in to help us to be what you want us to be. And Heavenly Father, help us also to be strong, to reach out to others, to hold us accountable, to be accountable to our spouse, but to do it in a way that you want us to in love. We praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Lee.